The Bliss Business Podcast, the show about empathy, connection, and consciousness in business. Today's episode is brought to you by Zero Company, your paid search, social media, and programmatic ad experts.
Welcome back to the show, everyone. I'm Steven Sakash here with my co-host again, Tulio Siragusa, and our special guest who we'll introduce in a moment. So I sometimes think sustainability is really just love extended over time. You know, when we care about something, a community, an ecosystem, a company, we naturally want it to endure. And the challenge is that many of our systems are built around that short-term transaction and extraction, just constantly thinking about that. But today, we're going to explore sustainability, not just, from a compliance standpoint, but as a leadership philosophy. Tulio, introduce our special guest today.
Absolutely. Our guest today is Amanda Fornal, a founder, executive coach, and startup advisor and business consultant with over 25 years of experience in technology, business transformation, and change management. Through her company, Orange SFM, she helps leaders build resilient, human-centered organizations by improving strategy, strengthening processes, and guiding teams through complex transitions. She's the founder of Founder Buddies and serves as a director with Founder Institute Germany, where she has advised more than 100 early stage founders. Amanda is also the creator of the Investing in Kindness initiative and the founder of Elephari, a storytelling platform born from her global research interviewing 612 people across more than 75 countries about how they define love. A fellow of the Explorers Club and founder of Women in Exploration, Amanda brings a rare combination of enterprise consulting, startup advising, and global culture research to the intersection of strategy, leadership, and transformation. Amanda, welcome to the Bliss Business Podcast.
Hi, everyone.
I love it. I want to get into so many of those different things. But Amanda, first, so you kind of work at this intersection of strategy and transformation and human-centered leadership. How do you define sustainable business practices in today's environment?
Well, I believe overall diversity of thought is how we push forward innovation, not just externally with who we interact with, but also with ourselves. So I think that intersection is really important to push forward in sustainable business practices. And it's also important to think about long-term and short-term, right? So you don't want only quick wins, and you don't only want to think about your long-term success. So sustainability, I'm thinking, okay, how can I be happy today as well as happy tomorrow, and everyone else be happy tomorrow, right? So we don't want to just be self-centered, and we don't want to think in just one time frame.
Yeah, I think there's that Native American philosophy of what this decision I make right now, how's it going to impact 7 generations from now? I think today we typically are thinking, hey, what's the next quarter results? We're always optimizing toward that quarterly earnings, call or something coming up, and it develops all kinds of issues along the way.
It's so true. And I remember I did a large scale project for a software company where we looked at pipeline management, and we were looking at pipeline management, and we looked at all the other companies, what they were doing, and they weren't thinking ahead many quarters. And that was really interesting to build a project specifically thinking far ahead for multiple quarters. And so that idea of being more sustainable, and it wasn't normal at the time when we implemented it. And I thought that was fascinating because we do want to think about quarters far ahead, not just the next quarter.
Yeah. I always say, 2 years from now, that quarter coming up is going to be the next quarter in that moment. So you can plan for it now, right? So, and we did a whole show on the Iroquois. Remember, Stephen? They influence, I think, even the Constitution and some of the founding principles. Okay, so Amanda, you created the Investing in Kindness initiative. How does kindness influence leadership and decision-making at scale? Can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, the project was inspired by someone saying that they wanted to invest in sociopathic founders instead of kind founders. And I found that odd and not great. But that's weird.
All of our businesses are designed right now to promote the sociopath and
megalomaniacs. Those are the only people
I
get
don't think
funded.
this is a great idea, guys. So let me say, and I was on a panel and I was asked what gets you up in the morning. And I was like, to do good. And I referenced this guy and I was like, I'm kind and I'm proud of it. And if we don't invest in kindness, I mean, that's on us, right? All we have is our humanity. And so then my hypothesis, I was like, well, if we do good, we feel good, other people feel good, and it should hit our bottom line. And so then I started looking into the academic research, and lo and behold, yes, that is accurate. If you are a kind leader, a pro-social leader, you do actually hit the bottom line. And why is that question? So when you are allowing people to feel safe at work, you are allowing people to be loyal to you, giving them respect, they are going to show up. And when they show up, they work harder, they get you more money, they push forward innovation. So again, it comes to thinking about it strategically. So a lot of people don't look at academic research. So when I do investing in kindness, I ask about that real stories. And you'll hear people say, well, when I was sick or I had a family member that I had to tend to, and my company showed up for me, Amanda, I could not have worked harder for them when I came back, because they respected me, they were kind, they thought about me. And so now you have them promoting you, they have them working harder. So if you just think logically, when you're good to your employees, they're going to work harder. Sure, not every human will act in the same way, but if we generalize, if you are good to your employees, are they going to show up for you? More likely, yes.
Yeah,
no, it's interesting. Go ahead.
I was going to say, there's that stat that we always bring up. It's 21% of the world's population is not engaged at work, right? And so
the other way.
Oh yeah, sorry. Is 21% is engaged. Roughly 80% not engaged.
21% not engaged wouldn't be so bad.
Yeah, wouldn't be so bad. Why not? Why aren't we the other way around? Really, is what the problem is. It's really because of, kind of like you said, that that sort of sociopathic approach to business, where it's just transactional, it's just extraction. You're extracting work from people, and they just don't want to show up, and they don't want to work. And you're only going to get, so speaking to the sociopath right out there right now, you're only going to get 20% of your workforce working really hard for you, right? You're the other 80%.
Think of it this way. It's like you're paying, that's 20% globally, 31% in US. So yeah. It's the same as like you're paying a full year salary, but they're only working 3 months out of the year or 2 months out of the year, and then send them home. You would never do that, but that's exactly what is happening. And CEOs are getting the thumbs up from their boards for doing a good job producing outcomes with that kind of productivity, which is mind blowing. And so I'm curious, like, what's the biggest misunderstanding? Because for years, some of us were called the crazies, talking about being empathetic and people centric. But now there are studies that show stats on the impact this has on business. It's strategic, but yet it's not being followed as much. Why is that? What do you think is the misunderstanding around this, that more and more companies are just not grasping onto this idea that it's not just good for people, it's good for business? What's the pullback, in your opinion?
Well, overall, people don't like change. So that's just like a common human thing. And I always make this joke in my interviews, is that being kind, you should be kind. It's nice. It's great. And it does hit the bottom line. So if you don't like being kind and you like money, just be kind because you like money. And maybe at the end you'll enjoy being kind, because it's really fun when, but why aren't they doing that, right? Is they might think that their actions are getting the best, but they might be getting something, but they could get something better, right? And that's the idea. And try it. And I think people don't understand what kindness is necessarily. And so I ask, one of the first questions is, how do you define investing in kindness? What does it mean to you? And it's truthfulness. It's not being just nice and being like, oh, you did a good job. That's not kind. That's not thoughtful. You want to say, this is what you did wrong, and this is how we can fix it in a nice way, right? And that's where the difference is. Kind is not sugarcoating the truth. Kind is being truthful, but doing it in a compassionate, empathetic way, for example.
So speaking about sustainable business practice and ethics, how does this contribute to sustainable business practice, the practice of kindness? I love what you said, by the way. Like, if you're going to do it just for the metrics, you might actually enjoy being kind too. I love that, because there's a lot of people that's all they care about is the metrics and the shareholder value. So try it. It might work. And then you might actually learn to be nice and be kind about it too. But how does it tie into sustainability? Let's connect the two. Maybe make a better case for how this does impact metrics too, because there's a lot of people still focus on the metrics.
Yeah, of course. I love metrics. I mean, you're not going to get me away from my metrics. They are what drives me. I love structure. I love numbers. Absolutely. But if we look at it in a metaphor, you can absolutely choose to rob a bank, right? That might be your choice because you want money and you want it fast. But A, you might go to jail. B, you will be looking behind you for the rest of your life. And that doesn't feel great. However, you could work hard and you can figure out a way to get your money ethically and without breaking the law, right? So it's an easy kind of metaphor for me to understand, because robbing a bank might seem fun at the moment for someone, but it's not a really great long-term strategy.
Thinking about leaders, so you've interviewed you've advised 100 founders, right, on things. Are there specific traits you would say, leadership traits that separate founders who build great companies to those who, have the burnout that we're talking about? Are there some specific traits?
Well, if you go to burnout, I mean, resilience is the first thing, right? So you think about, how do I get back up? Because it is a roller coaster and nobody's perfect. You're not going to be able to be the most thoughtful human being every moment of your life, right? There's things that we go through. However, you sign up and say, okay, I made a mistake, right? So that's important. So honesty is a great trait. But when we come back to that idea of resilience, I never advise people not to feel or not to say, this really sucks. Go in the corner, do what you need to do, cry, it's fine, but get back up and try again. And that is the founder mindset that is needed to build a company, because things don't work out all the time. So that's the number one thing. But also critical thinking and adaptability. You have this concept where if we have a group of people mentoring a founder, they might give them different information and they might get overwhelmed and say, what do I do? This person told me one thing, this one told me another. At the end of the day, you need to make those decisions. So you need to step back and say, these people all gave me different ideas. Now I'm going to say what's best for me, what's best for my company, what fits within my ethics. And now I make those decisions to move forward.
I don't want to jump ahead to purpose, but I do think like the importance of purpose in making those decisions is just so critical, because then we always say, your hell yes, your hell no, what you're, when you've got those two different decisions. And, for us, we kind of went through this process in the past couple of years of becoming more of a self-managed team, right? So that all the decisions don't have to come to me where I've got to decide these two things, but it's like, hey, you know how we operate, right? You know what our mantras are around here. If I don't need to be everywhere. And if you've got that kind of that well-defined purpose with it, that's what ends up being your boss, right? A lot of times. And so if you can empower people, I think to make decisions and stuff based on that, you can kind of step away so that you don't have to stress so much about all these, 3 different opinions. Your team can handle more than you think, I think. And that, that is a kindness, is, allowing them to kind of get out of that sort of hierarchy mindset where they've got to go and get a decision and can't do anything.
That is a great point. When you think about how we push forward innovation, people want to feel safe. So when you have this psychological safety where you can make mistakes, you can try new things, you will push forward innovation. And that is another piece where kindness really does play in, right? Making sure that they feel respected, they feel heard. Listening is one of the most powerful things we can do as leaders, as mentors, as advisors. It makes an incredible difference. Even if we are just listening to our employees or our customers, either way, it makes us more powerful.
I think You said something interesting there too, because part of the challenge is accountability. And so if you're a business owner or the CEO of a company, you can take risk. And if it doesn't work out, you've got no one to be accountable to, right? So there's no downside. But yet employees don't have that safety to also take those risks, because if something doesn't work out, there is a downside. But you're actually limiting innovation because you're not giving people the chance to take equal opportunity risk like a CEO would, so that could turn into great innovation. And sometimes it doesn't work out. But so that I think that kindness is part of also showing grace and realizing just the same way you can take measured risks, you got to give people the opportunity and the grace to do the same thing, and not make it so impossible for them to make a mistake. Or you got to hold yourself accountable too when you mess up, equally like everybody else. And I think that's part of the problem, is you don't have equivalence in these kinds of structures where the minute you start treating people with a sense of equivalence, then you begin to respect what they're capable of, and they bubble up, like Stephen said, what they're capable of, because you remove the fear of messing up. So it's quite magical to see it when it happens, but it takes time, and a lot of companies don't have the patience for it. So,
one of the things I like to get into here is, as you know, is kind of talking about like systems of kindness, and on this topic of sustainability, I kind of want to know, so what kind of systems must be in place for sustainability or ethics to move from, philosophy to practice? Any advice on kind of systems, or systems of kindness in general? I really want to dig into.
I love process. I've looked at processes in many companies all over the world, and I think that it's important to revisit them and make sure that we are doing the things that we want to do. So from a small company perspective, one founder, their processes are going to look very different than a company that may have 20,000, 24,000 employees, right? So seeing what those processes are and making sure that we pivot as needed. Right? We learn things every day, and we need to take that into account. So we have this process that we think about. This is going to be how we implement something. However, when we learn something new, we can't be scared to change that process. And I think that is not only kind to the company, our customers, and our employees, but it's important for, again, innovation. I keep coming back to that word, right? I think that all of these things are really important. So a specific system, I can't say, but it depends on what you're implementing, right? And again, understanding and listening to what might be needed in order to implement that. And then we have this idea of management buy-in when you talk about change management. If the managers are not saying you have to do this, let's say be kind, be open, listen to people, then it's less likely that the employees are going to do it, because they are looking to you as a leader to do the right thing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's true. And you brought up that point of being like an individual one-person company versus like a 20,000 person company. That really, for me, when we started thinking about this and articulating this thought, it was when we were going through this period of scaling, and we started to systemize stuff. And so it's like, well, I want to make sure we're systemizing also that empathy and that love and that kindness in what we're doing. So that's how we came up with kind of the bliss theory of being able to do that, is making sure that we don't set our systems, up so that they're just going to be like these sort of cold, relentless, pursuit of profit, pursuit of that one metric. We also want to look at things like employee wholeness and, empowering people and all these things where kindness this is really, and like you said, this is investing in kindness in our systems and in our DNA of our company.
Amanda, I think part of the challenge is also there's so much focus on making the one-dimensional leaders heroes. You get them in, you see them interviewed, you talk about it, especially in Silicon Valley, right? They're really like that one leader who did such a groundbreaking technology, but the rest of their life is a complete disaster. Like they have no family life, no real friends, no real connection, except for this one dimensional success they've had. And they get put on a pedestal like that's the way you live, and it's not. It's an empty way of being. And so I'm just curious, like, are there some companies in the 100 different early stage founders you work with through like the Founders Buddies? Are there some patterns you've seen for those who tend to be more grounded and balanced and be multidimensional? And how does that impact like sustainability practice? Have you seen a contrast between the one-dimensional leader and those who think more about having everything in their lives and encouraging that from everybody else? Which of the two seem to succeed better in terms of sustainable growth and practices?
The media and interviews are going to tell you what they want to tell you, right? So some people might think all founders are super young and they make billions of dollars, right? But when you look at the reality and you look, again, it comes down, if you look at academic research, older founders are technically, statistically more successful, right? So now you pair a young founder and an old founder together, maybe that's like the super team, because you have that young, excited person, and then you have the grounded person who has a lot of experience where they could work together, right? So I always encourage people to look at real data versus what you might see flashed in front of you in front of a TikTok or something like that, right? So really looking at and saying, okay, well, statistically speaking, this is what is more likely to be successful. And being a empathetic, kind leader at the end of the day is going to build loyalty. What does loyalty build? Loyalty is going to build people coming up and working harder for you, which hits your bottom line. So when you say, don't look at one metric, maybe you do look at one metric and then you see the levers that is going to push that forward. So if your one metric is your revenue, how am I going to get more revenue, right? I want this person to work more effectively. How do I get this person to work more effectively? I build loyalty, right? So every time somebody leaves your company, you're losing money. It costs a lot to rehire, retrain, going through that entire process. So how do you get them to stay? And you shared a new statistic with me. How many people are not even engaged? That is crazy pants to me, right? So how do I just change that metric to say, okay, well, I want more than 20% of these people to care about their job. And if I care about my job, I'm going to work harder. Even in bad work situations, I've heard people say, I'm working 60 hours and it kind of sucks, but I really believe in what they're doing and I love my boss. Or they stopped paying us because we didn't get the next funding round. But to be honest, I just believe in it. And until I get another job, I'm going to work for free. What? Right? You see these things that people can build because people look up to them and trust them and are excited.
I want to kind of, if we've got time too, Leo, I want to jump into a little bit on her interviews of 612 people on the definition of love. Like, what stuck out to you with that whole process? Was there, a moment maybe of where someone's definition really changed how you thought about it, or a whole bunch of little moments? What kind of stuck out with you in that process?
You never know when you're going to get inspiration. And this project was inspired by someone telling me about an art project that was about a negative subject. And I was like, I don't want to see that art project. That sounds sad. And so I thought to myself, what could I bring to the table that would be positive? And love seemed like a positive subject to research. And it's something that anyone can talk about it in any culture and almost at any age. And so I went in with this very kind of scientific voice where I wanted to see how our cultural nuances change the way we defined love. And when I started interviewing people, I just assumed that love would be positive. So the first thing that stood out to me is that people tell the best, which I expected, and the worst moments of their lives when it comes to love, because it could be heartbreak and loss. That was absolutely the first thing that surprised me. The second thing that surprised me was people talked about self-love, and it wasn't even on my list of types of love. It just didn't occur to me to even talk about that. And so that was really interesting, because then I start studying, what is self-love? What does it mean to self-love or self-not love? And those pieces were interesting. And then the next thing that was incredible is human resilience. So this project became more about what it means to be human than anything else, and how resilient people can be through hardship. And you would never know. You look at someone, they show up and they look fine every day, and they've had incredible things going on in their life. And I think as leaders, that for me is a big takeaway. You never know what's happening to someone. And so if they drop the ball, or if they're having a bad day, or if they snap at you when they never usually would, maybe you should just take a step back. Instead of escalating the situation, say, are you okay? Like, what's going on? Because it is incredible when you sit down and ask people about their lives, what you learn.
We touched on this a little bit already in terms of the role purpose and being purposeful plays in being purposeful, being kind. You could be purposeful and being kind and everything else we've talked about. And what's interesting is that consumers have an increased expectation from companies to operate with more responsibility and more transparency. That is a fact. And
Julio, I'm gonna add in there, and more love too.
And more love.
We're absolutely seeing that. You're seeing them boycott companies right now because they don't think they're aligned with love in some way or another. And we're seeing more and more of it.
I think that's going to become a very normal type of conversation over time. The role that love play. I think we're very futuristic in this show, because fast forward in a few years, that's going to be a normal kind of conversation, that because people just need that, and it shouldn't be a barrier where it's only outside of work. You should be able to experience love even at work. But that's why we're doing the monologue series, by the way, that air on Fridays. So Fridays, check out the monologue series where we break down bliss. So I'm just curious about, from your perspective, how does sustainability connect with like a company's deeper purpose and your personal purpose? I'd love to understand like what's driving you personally with the work you do.
Yeah, when we talk about sustainable, right, it means that we will exist later, right? And so if your customers are requiring something, lean in and listen, right? So we talked about that listening is one of the most powerful things that you can do. So when we talk about the idea that people are telling these companies they need to show up, that just makes me so happy. I love that, right? You are saying, now I want you to make sure that you are ethical. And that's how I will pick my brands. And that's a beautiful thing. And I think one of the reasons we're tilting this way is because we have more access to information. And it's a simple thing where you might not have read the back of your food label before because you just didn't know that you should or that you could, or even earlier, they didn't exist. And I know it's a simple thing, when I buy a piece of food, might look at the back piece, and I encourage my parents to do that, who never would. And they're like, wow, that's really surprising. I was like, yes, I need you to do that. And so not only is the information available, but we can help each other learn how to pick better brands. And I think that is also a really nice thing, is helping others who might not be aware, because we don't all have access to the same information. And I'm going to have a different conversation with someone who is on the internet all the time versus someone who lives in a village who doesn't have access to electricity, right? So really understanding who you're talking to and how to give them guidance on how to make the best decisions when they are using their dollars.
What happens when leaders ignore being purposeful, especially during like a transformational process? Because I think it's safe to say, with everything that's happening with AI and digitization, we're all, whether we like it or not, in some form of transformation. So what happens when leaders ignore being purposeful?
Well, I'd say every instance is going to be different, right? But I'll give you an example that I think is a little funny in a way, right? I love AI. I use it every day. It's my best friend. I'm not saying that you shouldn't use technology. Absolutely. It's incredible. And let's try to use it for the best reasons possible, right? To push us forward and to help us think more strategically. However, back in the day when we first started doing financial services on the phone. I worked in financial services for about the first 7 years of my career. And people really like that in the banks. They're like, oh, this is amazing. I don't need to go talk to anyone. I don't need to go in the bank. And they do their banking on their phone. And then I was called in and I needed to write strategic call routing rules because they weren't upselling or cross-selling anything. So they were losing money. So they were short-sighted and saying, we're going to save money by not having call center reps. Then all of a sudden they weren't making any money, right? So it's about that, again, short-term and long-term thinking, right? Short-term, yeah, let's push some people to do customer service without a human being. But hey, let's still think about our sales going forward, because at the end of the day, we're a company. We don't just want to save money. We also want to make money. So you need to think about your customer retention, your revenue, and how we save money, right? So thinking of those three things strategically versus being short-sighted is going to be the power play.
I want to go back to the love conversation again. So the thing that I think of, okay, when I hear someone who's interviewed 612 people about definition of love is, well, after all that, what's your definition of love?
You know, when I started the project, I allowed random people to interview me on camera as well. I thought it would be good to trace my process and to see if I changed. And I've never done a full analysis of my own interview. So maybe today is the kickoff. I should do that. But in general, I always said it was happiness. I always associated that love with happiness, because if you have love that isn't bringing you happiness into your life, maybe it's not actually love, right? Mm. And I take that because we had so many different stories where you would have some challenges in your life and you would talk about how that affected your love life, whether it's with a parent, with a romantic partner. But if you're not happy, maybe we need to revisit the relationship and how it's working, right? So for me, love is related to happiness.
You know, I kind of see love, and this Tulio kind of hinted on this a little bit earlier, as like we're talking about the future right now, sometimes in a lot of these conversations, but because I kind of see love as a gravity. You know, it's kind of what pulls us together, right? It's what connects us, and it's kind of what pulls us forward. And, you know, often seeing through the eyes of other people and beyond, this is kind of how we grow. And so that's why what Tulio said about, we're kind of talking about the future. Well, it's because we're talking about love, which to me, you know, it's just in these conversations, and we're talking about business, it's all just sort of inevitable in some way or another. Yeah, people are going to fight kicking and screaming, you know, through this whole process sometimes. But it really is just this sort of inevitable kind of force of almost like evolution in some way. How do you feel about the kind of thinking of it like in terms of like this gravitational force?
Well, what's very funny about this gravity thing is one of my oldest interviewees, he was in his 80s. He said, love is like gravity. I can show it to you, but I can't really explain it to you. And it was really interesting because, you know, he dropped something in the call, and it's hard to describe it. We all know gravity. We all know how it works, but it's a little bit more complicated than just saying, this is an orange and it's a piece of fruit that I eat, right? So I love this idea where love is so complicated that I almost had 600 plus different definitions, right?
That's what I would picture, is that everyone's going to come at it in this different way, but continue. Go ahead.
But when you ask children something that comes, so I did some 3-year-olds, 1 3-year-old, then 4-year-olds, 5-year-olds, some really young people. And that concept is more, it's hugs and kisses, and it's related to their dog, right? So often you see that. And what was interesting is that was cross-cultural. So you might have someone who was quite poor, who had these life experiences, and someone who was quite wealthy, and different cultures, different countries. And these two kids would say, it's hugs and kisses, right? And that's really sweet and simple. But when you have someone in their 80s and their 90s, and everything in between, every moment of our life defines who we are and how we feel. So everyone's definition is a little bit nuanced. And that, to me, is fantastic, right? We all bring something to the table. And I loved that about the project.
So we've, on this show, the question we've asked, and you'll be the 129th person, I think, that we've asked this, is what...
We're catching up with you, Amanda. We're catching up.
Yeah, we got a way to go. Is what role do you think does love or should love play in business?
You know, when I ask about love, I say, which love do you value the most? And it could be my love of my job. And that's okay, right? The idea is we're not judging what you love. And if you love your job, that is amazing. And not everybody does, as you talked about at the beginning of this podcast. So it can play a lot. I love to work. It makes me really happy. And I think that's wonderful, but not everybody loves their job. So maybe there needs to be some other type of love within their job. Maybe they love their employees. Maybe they love their friends, whatever that might be. Maybe they love the snacks that they get at their job, right? Something in that job should bring you some joy, some love. And it might be the job itself. It might be the people you're helping. Some people that work in the nonprofit space may not love the exact thing they're doing, but so in love with helping, saving lives. And I think all of those things are really important.
You know, I think you can have it all. I think you can be multidimensional and have it all. I think there's a lot of people who think it's one or the other, but you can achieve it all. It's a mindset, and but we'll see. We'll see how many people adapt. So, quick thing, we want to give our audience something they can work with, something tangible they can do, they can take away from this show, from what you've been sharing. So for leaders navigating complex decisions today, maybe they have to make some decisions this month. What is maybe one step they can take to build more ethical and sustainable systems, like immediately? What would you give them as a one step? You must do this. If anything, do this, do it this month. This is going to help you build more sustainability in an ethical way in your business. What would that be?
One thing that can be really helpful is writing down your personal ethics and making that very clear. And think about it, make it detailed. Read through that and say, am I showing up as this person? And if I'm not, what changes do I need to do in order to show up as that person? Now, maybe you are already showing up as that person. What do I need to do at my company to make sure my company is showing up in this way? It's a very difficult and simple exercise at the same time, because when you think through it, you might be surprised to be like, oh, wow, I never sat down and thought about it. And I find that a lot within coaching or even my interviews, people will say, I've never been asked that question before. Think about it. And it is a powerful exercise for you to do for yourself and for your company.
I love that. Okay, so for those who want to learn more about you and your company, what do you recommend they do? Where should they find you?
Yeah, you can definitely connect with me on LinkedIn. You can also check me out on either my Linktree websites or directly go to Hypatia Leadership or Orange SFM or Investing in Kindness, all the websites.
Awesome.
I love it. And where can we find all this research on the definition of love and everything that you're doing in that regard?
Yeah, loveisthedocumentary.com has some of my research. I did these interviews 10 years ago and I haven't published many of them. So I've been encouraged many times to start publishing more.
Yes, please.
And my Investing in Kindness, I do have over 75 blogs about this posted. So from a leadership perspective, it is that companion piece. So we have the Love Is, which is the global piece and human piece. And then the Investing in Kindness is pulling in that business perspective and really thinking about it from a corporate as well as a startup lens.
Amanda, thanks for jumping on the show with us. To our listeners, thank you too for listening. And like the last piece of advice that Amanda gave is, I and we kind of talk about this a lot, it's really just like auditing yourself and auditing your company towards your values, and if you aren't even sure what your values are, this is what we said, just audit toward love, figure out what the loving thing is to do. And we will see you next time on the Bliss Business Podcast.